Hello again everyone, welcome back to the first video of 2022. By the time this is published, we still expect people to be in the celebration mode, and so happy holidays for that, happy 2022. But let us recount some of the best games that happened in 2021 to push and motivate our chess in 2022 as well. I think this video will be inspiring for people who want to hit a certain goal in 2022, and yeah, just in general to be helpful on how these grandmasters find an exciting plan to be able to win games like these. But very quickly I want to take you to the beginning of the year, where we have the game between Jorden van Foreest and Niels Grandelius. Now, this game for some people might not be so interesting because it's literally prepared by Jorden's team, and so they're all theory. I won't talk about the opening too in depth, but in essence, the novelty started out somewhere from here when white plays pawn to c4. This is capitalizing on the fact that the knight can't move because it's pinned to the rook here on a8, which is more valuable because of the knight move. Obviously, the bishop takes on a8, so that's no good. And so obviously Niels plays pawn takes on c3, which is an passant. After pawn takes c3, preparing to play pawn to c4 again, we place rook to a7. Now he dealt with the threat pretty nicely, right? Moving the rook out of the way. But the threat is not done yet. Rook f to b1 attacking the queen, and after the queen moved to c8 and c4, we do see a blast from Jorden by playing knight to b5. Now this must be something that Niels Grandelius missed, but clearly a move prepared by Jorden van Foreest. The idea is clear obviously, attacks the rook, attacks the pawn on d6, so it cannot be left uncaptured. And so Niels did the correct thing and take the knight. But already we have two connected passed pawns, and we talk about this in our video as well, that two connected passed pawn on the 6th rank and on the 7th rank is worth a piece, sometimes a rook, to sacrifice 4. And so in the end, Niels just gives back a piece. But even in this particular continuation, white still has one passed pawn on the queen side that's already pushed to the queen, and with the power of double bishop pair, it's difficult not to push this rook away and promote this pawn to a win. Use the double bishop pair to win this game. Nothing too much here. White sacrifices a rook, black sacrifices a rook, and in the end, does a king walk that resembles the one that is played by Jan Timman and Nigel Short in 1999. In this position, black just resigned. And there's just nothing that black can do to stop this. Queen to d2 check seems like a, nice check to block this, but then pawn to f4, this is basically the end. Now let's move on to the highlight of the year, where Andrey Esipenko plays Magnus Carlsen for the first time and defeated the world champion, having full control from the opening. Now again, the game starts out with a Sicilian, again, because that's where it's most exciting. This particular pawn push, pawn to g4, pawn to g5 is also very common in Scheveningen, where black plays pawn to e6. But after knight to d7, the theory is to play a3 to sacrifice a pawn, and in the end to bring the rook to g1, as what Andrey Esipenko did. Now this awesome thing in this variation continues when black plays knight to c6, and also placed pawn to g6. This allows a tactical continuation for Andrey Esipenko, which is knight takes on b5. Now this is crazy because you can't leave the knight here alive after capturing a pawn, and Magnus captured that, but this isn't really a piece sacrifice because after knight takes c6 and bishop takes c6, we have queen to c3, attacking the bishop and the rook at the same time. Remember, black plays pawn to g6, allowing the attack on the long diagonal. And so Magnus chose to save the rook by castling on the king's side, but this loses the bishop on c6, and in this continuation he's just up a pawn. And what matters the most is that it has two connected passed pawns that it can push on the queen side without any pawns on the black side trying to stop it. Now I won't go on further, but he went on to win convincingly without any problem, although obviously with Magnus Carlsen you still take a lot of time to convert this to a win. Because let's face it, the world champion doesn't lose a lot, and there isn't a time where I think the world champion is out of form and therefore loses a lot of game in a tournament. And so to be able to beat a world champion on first try, that alone deserves to be called the best game of the year. For the next game, let's just jump ahead a bit further to the World Cup between Bashir AT and Rinat Jumabayev. Now we get a Benoni-like structure in the opening, but black has successfully moved the queen away so you can move the rook here to d8 and push pawn to d5. Obviously you don't want to have your backward pawn on d6 being targeted all the time, and so pawn to d5 here is just the best move and practical way to get rid of your weaknesses. After all, taking on e4 means you're releasing a discovery attack on the queen here, and so white plays knight to a4. You threaten my queen, I threaten your queen. But Jumabayev doesn't really care about that. He plays pawn takes on e4. After knight takes b6. Of course, the usual rook takes d2 would have lost to knight takes e2. Suddenly, black's just down a rook for a pawn. So this is not nice. But what white really missed is that black doesn't really care about the queen, and go ahead and place pawn takes on f3.
Say what?
And so this is just a straight up queen sacrifice. Because of the bishop to d3 and pawn takes b6, we have two knights and a pawn versus a queen. So material wise this is not enough, but black argues that the position is not really easy to play, and indeed the position requires white to play pawn to b3 to stop the immediate pawn to c4 and pinning down the bishop to the queen, winning it afterwards. But that's not really the instinct that comes to everybody, right? White plays queen to e3, and that still allows pawn to c4 anyway. The idea is not pinning down bishop anymore, but after the bishop move, we can take the bishop and use our own minor pieces to chase the queen around, and then this particular variation clears up the way for the knight to play knight to f3 check, forking the king and the rook. It will have been interesting to see how black manages to find a way to win this, but white did not go to this route, neither did he place pawn to b3 at this critical moment, and in the end when pawn to c4 comes, he gives up the bishop, practically just giving up all the advantage, and get his queen chased around by all his minor pieces. As you can see, there's nothing more that can be said here. Black just win convincingly after playing rook to d1. Of course, after queen takes on d1, knight f2 check, picks up the queen, we have 2 minor pieces, and we should be able to win the game in jiffy. And so it's really nice one to see, even in the World Cup, people can risk that much as to sacrificing their queen to advance to the next round. And if you're not familiar, World Cup is just basically a tournament where the system is just a knockout, so you lose, you get out, that kind of tournament. So it's nice to see sacrifices here and there. The next game also comes from the World Cup, the first round, played by 2 equally matched grandmasters, and I'm just gonna go ahead and skip all of the opening phase because it's not really important anyway. But the critical moment starts around here, when black's bishop is threatened with pawn to a3, and just about everybody thought that he would just move it around to, let's say, d6 or c5. Again, what white missed here is that black can play knight takes on f2, this is sacrificing a knight, but the common idea is to draw the king out so that the combination of the rook and the queen can deliver a checkmate. Queen takes on e3 check, after king to g2, pawn to d4 check, reintroducing the bishop on v7 on this long diagonal, and so this will be kaput for white if he plays like this. But nevertheless, a common idea, entirely missed by white in this perspective. So obviously pawn takes on b4, but here knight takes f3, gaining our piece back. In this point of time, black's just winning a pawn. And so everything proceeded in one-sided fashion. But the cool thing is after knight to f6, black's just saying, hey, take my knight on h3, I dare you. Because after queen takes on h3, queen f3 check, this will be followed by a very quick checkmate here on this diagonal after the diagonal opens up. And so bishop to c1 attacking the queen, but then knight to g4 doesn't really care about the queen anymore. Again, the theme comes back again and again to this bishop on this long diagonal, combined with as many pieces trying to deliver a checkmate on the king side. So obviously after takes here, we play knight to e3 and that's checkmate. And after rook to d3, we play pawn to d4, we don't move the queen. And so hurry up and take me so I can just checkmate you down the line. White doesn't fall for the bait, but then is forced after queen to g1 check to take the queen on g1. And after this, black can deliver checkmate with knight to h2. The game ended its checkmate, and it's widely talked about in the mid-September. So one of the best games in 2021. Starting from the most common idea, knight takes on f2, drawing the king out so it can actually deliver a checkmate. The last game that we're going to talk about is from the semi-final of the World Cup between Magnus Carlsen and Vladimir Vedosiev in this Caro-Kann, where white is just controlling the game throughout the opening. And so again, just one-sided. But even with that said, black's just very solid on the king side. Okay, the rook cannot go out, and so this is basically the worst thing about this position. But after a few more moves, white still doesn't have a way to break through, except for playing pawn to f4 or pawn to f5. Now what's amazing is after knight to e3, which is seemingly the best move, attacking the queen and taking the pawn, we do see the world champion just pushing everything on the center of the board to d5 and d6. Now having that controlled pass point we talked about earlier. After bishop to b6, bishop to c4, stopping the pawn to push forward, king g8 to play king h7 so the rook can come out. We do see pawn to d6 is pushing the pawn forward to promote it, but after this continuation, when black plays queen to g4 just to trade off the queen and to minimize the stress of the position, Magnus Carlsen plays rook takes f5, sacrificing exchange. Now I all thought this is a practical move to begin with, because after the obvious queen takes e2 and bishop takes e2, if you were to capture on f5, I've removed one barricade and I can push the pawn forward. We can start with bishop to c4, bishop to b5 to harass the rook, rook to f1 next. Seems enticing, attacking the pawn on f5. And so there's just many play to follow after sacking an exchange. But obviously after rook takes f5, we can play queen takes f5, which happens in the game. Now I preserved the barricade of the pawn on e6 and f7, and you probably won't get through. But what we didn't notice is as one sacrifice of rook isn't enough, Magnus Carlsen went on to play rook takes f7, just sacrificing another rook.
Say what?
But the core idea remains the same as the last game, in that if the king takes on f7, we draw the king out again, and so queen takes e6 is check. In this variation, we can keep checking the light squares, because obviously he's just weak, we control all the light squares, and after queen f5 and e6, trapping the rook, but if the rook comes to d6, we checkmate. black plays queen to f6, but this is useless. After pawn takes on d7, an exchange of queens, we can see who is really trapped in this position and can be considered dead, which is the rook here on h8. There's no way that the rook can get out, and Magnus Carlsen goes on to demonstrate that when he plays bishop to g4 and stopping the rook from coming out of the square, because everywhere he steps is going to be captured, of course. And after a few spiteful moves, black, which is Vladimir Fedoseev, actually resigned, rendering Magnus Carlsen to go on to semi-final against Duda. But that's our version of the 5 best game in 2021. You can come up with yours as well in the comment below. Again, if you've noticed, they are all from classical games, because I've always thought that classical chess is the epitome of chess, and also rapid chess and blitz chess does not play any role in giving you any master title. But that said, it still doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the rapid and blitz game from 2021. I link it down below in the description. The list was created by chess.com, and so it has 15 games. So yeah, you might want to check that out. But this is basically our version. Do drop your version down below in the comment section. Drop a like if you think you enjoyed this video. But otherwise, wishing you a happy new year. See you in the next one. Thanks for watching.